I'll have to put the glass of water on the floor, I think. Now I'm going to introduce myself first. My name's Buster, and I'm going to deliver a few words of wisdom before Barry starts talking about himself. There was a guy named Yaska, and he asked Yudhishthira, "What is the greatest of all mysteries?" And the answer was, "Every day countless people die, and yet those who remain alive live as if they were immortals." And a Roman bloke called Horace, he wrote, "The brief arc of our days present us from launching prolonged hopes." I think that might have something to do with Barry's career. Okay, thanks, Buster. Okay. I won't have to say too much because it's there on the screen. About the same time as I was walking through Martin Place, my dad was in boot camp getting ready to go off to the Middle East.
Excuse me, Barry, could you use the microphone, please? Could you use the microphone?
So, is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. There we go. So then he went, of course, to New Guinea. They pulled out all the troops from the Middle East to come back to defend Australia with the attack of the Japanese in the Pacific. So that's about the time I became conscious of where he was and what he was doing. And of course, New Guinea stuck in my mind, and then I became fascinated with the place. And these are some of the books that I read fairly early on that fed that fascination. And as Jim pointed out, I went to New Guinea in 1962. I'd graduated in anthropology, done a diploma of education, and went off as a chalkie for the administration. And I asked to be posted to Telefomin, which is, if I can make this work, here we go. There. It's Highland Valley at about 4,500 feet. And the valleys run east-west more or less, with high mountains on either side. While I was there, Brian Cranston from the British Museum came to do field research and a collection for the British Museum, and he went to a place about 2 days' walk to the west of Telefomin. But before he went there, he didn't know any Pidgin English, and it's the first time he'd been to New Guinea. So I went around with him locally at Telefomin to get him into the rhythm of meeting people, asking them about things and so on. And then he went off to Telefomin and made a good collection for the British Museum, and these were the notes, a couple of pages of the notes he made. So while I was watching him do all this, I realised this is what I wanted to do too. That social anthropology with kinship systems and all that actually bored me to tears. So I decided this was much more interesting, and so I decided that I'd try and find out more about these house boards and shields, which you can see drawings of there, that Brian made in his field notebook. So I started walking around the region. I'd go off during holidays, sometimes take some of the students with me, because quite often they were teenagers, even though they were just doing primary school, because they were learning English for the first time. So we'd go back to their village and talk to their kin and so on, families, record the house boards, as you can see there, and shields and so on, and took a lot of notes. And I did that for quite a while, over a fairly large area, including visits to Bolivip. Bolivip was the village made famous by Ivan Champion when he and Carius walked across New Guinea from the Fly River over to the Sepik. And one of the places where they staged and got a lot of help was at Bolivip. So in my surveying of boards and shields and so on, I took photographs of everything I could. And recently I was contacted by a professor of geology who'd retired from the University of Papua New Guinea, and he asked me if I knew anything about this shield. So I went back to my field photographs, and there it is there on the right-hand side with a bit of light splashing on the bottom. This shield was photographed on the left there, upside down, but I've turned the photo up the right way. And you can see the holes in the shield and so on, and the design, that part of the design and that part there, up here, just across that piece there and that piece there. It's the same shield. So he was quite chuffed that this shield he'd got from somewhere way, way back, that he found out where it was from. And it was from inside one of the cult houses at Bolivip. This walk I've done about 4 times, from Olsevip to Bolivip, across west to Tabubil, which is here, sometimes going to Tabubil and up, and sometimes taking a shortcut, then over the mountains to Telefomin, where Cranston was, from the British Museum, and then east through Alatman to Telefomin, then out to Aliptaman and Faraman. So that's the region from which I did these surveys of all the houseboards and shields. And I turned that into a master's thesis at the University of Sydney. Now that's the photograph. No, that's the photograph that Ivan Champion took in 1926 at Bolivip. And that houseboard there is the one that I photographed in 1967 there. You can see the similarity. It's partly hidden by that post there, but that's the same board. It's lost the ones on either side, so it's just that one. And these shields here are sacred objects with the ancestral skulls and leg and arm bones on either side of the ancestors that are on the bottom. And those skulls, the shields, keep the skulls, the ancestral relics, warm. That is, keeps the heat, the spiritual heat of the ancestors alive by having those shields at the back of them. Backtracking a little, because that walk I did in 67 was a bit later. In 65, while I was just finishing up as a teacher at Telefomin, I got involved in this expedition to the Star Mountains. So there's Telefomin there, there's the Star Mountains there right on the border. And this was the bunch of guys that's me there, and these are the other fellows. I'm still in contact with Tom, he lives in Sydney here. John Huon was a Frenchman, he was a medical assistant, he died several years ago. David Cook is in Canada, and I can communicate with him. Mike Shepard's in New Zealand. I don't know what happened to Paul Simons. He disappeared off the radar. Last I saw him was 1983. So we set off, and it was a 3-month trip. On the way, we met various people, and this young fella here is the same man as here. You can tell by the pigtail necklace he's wearing. It's the same young man. Now that is not a posed photograph. They were just standing there and I took the snap. And in the Star Mountains, of course I got lots of photographs, but this one is looking west into West Papua, and there's snow-capped Juliana. It's got another name now, Punkak Mandala. There it is there with snow on top. No snow there anymore. It's all gone with climate change. And this image here is taken looking due north, and the Bawani Mountains, which are the coastal range on the north coast of New Guinea, can be seen there, that line of mountains there. So that's 200 kilometres to the north, and that's about 100 kilometres to the west. And these are people from the south side of the Star Mountains. This is an initiation hairdo. And these are people from the north side of the Star Mountains. They're Balman. These are Wapkaiman. They're at Balman. Very similar style of adornment and dress and so on. This is a shield from the south side of the Star Mountains, right near the border, just a stone's throw from the border with West Papua. And these are paintings on the inside of a men's house of the At Balman on the north side of the Star Mountains. In 1968, I decided I wanted to find out if the carving and painting styles of the central New Guinea area were related northwards into the upper Sepik. So I organised an expedition focused from centred at based at Green River, and I was accompanied by an anthropologist who was coming for the first time to New Guinea, so I was sort of taking him to boot camp, as it were. And this chap, David Balmer, was working with me at the time. We were working in a market research company in North Sydney. And so they came with me. We got two little Honda outboard motors and rigged up a double canoe, and we went from Green River to a little river here, and then down onto the Sepik, and then all the way up this valley here, the Idam Valley, where I later spent a year, and then further down the Sepik to the August River, to here, and also further up the Sepik right to the border, because Hufi is on the border with West Papua. And we went back up the October River, and these other walks, these were all walk. We did all this walking here, across here, up to Bibion. And Bibion is where I recorded the making of stone tools. They are still able to make stone tools from river pebbles. This is a fellow with his arrow. You can see how long the arrows are. They're incredibly long arrows. Some people call them spears, but they're not spears, they're arrows. And that's a woman from the same general area and her children. And this is a young woman and a child from the border mountains to the north of Green River. One of the things I noticed on that trip was the different kinds of equipment they use for smoking tobacco. So on the river, they use a two-part piece, a gourd and a bamboo tube, often with very beautiful designs on them. And that, I suppose, cools the smoke. A bit like a hookah, I guess. This is a bamboo smoking pipe, again with engraved designs. And this one is a much wider diameter bamboo pipe with engraved designs. This is an old shield that I managed to photograph at Green River in the possession of someone else. It had been used in a fight on the August River many years ago and had some embedded arrow points in it. So it's stone carved, that one. And this is what they make the shields from, the buttress roots of these forest trees. They're quite thin, so they just have to clean off both sides of the buttress root, and they've got a basic board. They just cut the shape out, they've got a shield, and they carve the design, painted. Now these shields here are way oversized. They were carved like that for sale, thinking that the bigger they are, the more money they get. But they're quite beautiful designs. Now, this is a photograph by Richard Thermal in 1914. He was a German explorer, ethnographer who went up to Sepik, all the way up to Telefomin. He arrived in Telefomin in September 1914. He was the first white person or European person anywhere in the highlands of the island of New Guinea. And he's often overlooked. People think other people were the first, but he was the first in 1914. And when he came to the Green River area, these are the kind of phallocrypts or penis gourds that the men were wearing, straight or curly, like that. But when I got there in the 60s, they were wearing these little egg-shaped ones. And that is a style that came from the border mountains to the north. So within less than 50 years, or about 50 years, a style of accoutrement that was worn in one place had filtered down and become the normal fashion on the river, on the Sepik River, at Green River. And this type of phallocrypt here is a special ceremonial one, and when they dance it swings up and clacks against that bone belt. So it's all part of a ritual to do with the fertility of the sago palm and also for curing illness. And you can see the hand drums there, quite short, and with the designs on the ends are very varied. They're almost never see one the same. Whereas at Telefomin in that central New Guinea area, almost all the designs look the same. But here they're a great variety. Now this was the stone tool making. They searched around on the riverbed and found a suitable rock, pebble, like these here. And then they hammer it with another stone to get an edge. And then after they're satisfied with the flaking and the shape, they grind it on the river and then they bind it. So that was 1968. They still had that technology available. Now these are the border mountains here, looking northeast. So from around about here, looking that way, towards the Bawani Mountains, which are back in there. Whereas down here, it's all riverine. So in 1969, I thought I'd do some more exploring and gathering of artefacts. During both 68 and 69, I was collecting for the Australian Museum here, for Berlin Museum, for Leiden Museum, and for Port Moresby. I made the collections and divided them in four. So I put them all in, all the arrows together, all the stone tools together, all the ornaments together of different kinds, and then one for them, one for them, one for them, one for them. Did it like that, so everybody got a fair share and a good distribution of types or kinds of objects, and from all over the area. So I started at Amonda in the northern part of the border mountains and walked through here. And the anthropologist who did work there was Alfred Gell, Gell, a UK anthropologist. He was there when I came through at Umeda. And he wore those, bottle end, the bottle end kind of glasses. He was short-sighted. And the whole of his house was open at both ends, and it was raining that day and windy, and everything was coming through. And he just seemed unaware of it. He's got his notes there and it's getting drenched with spray from outside. He seemed to be totally unaware of all that sort of thing. All he was interested in what he was doing, he was that kind of fellow. Came down to Amanab, and then from there went over to Yellow River and did a walk around there, collecting and so on, photographing. then back to Amanab and walked down here to Green River. And before all of that, I walked out that way. And when you get out here, it's like you're walking in water up to here. You know, it's up to your belly. Because when it rains, all the swamp just fills up. When you're in the dry season, of course, it goes down a bit and it's a bit easier to walk. But when I was there, it was like you're half swimming. And always getting diarrhea and a bit of, problem with your stomach and having to self-medicate all the time. I try to forget those aspects of it. In the northern part of the border mountains, they have orchestras of trumpets, wooden trumpets, different sizes. That's the biggest, and then they come down in size, and they each have a note. And when they play them, it's like, whoo, 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 and they have to coordinate 4 or 5 trumpets to make up the rhythm and the melody of what it is they're doing. It takes a fair bit of training, I would imagine. But they only each play one note. The hand drums from there are probably the longest ones in all of New Guinea. They're quite long. They're often over 1 metre long. That's probably one of the shorter ones, actually. Now, when they chew betel nut, of course, they have the lime in a container, and in this part of New Guinea, the container is a gourd, and they can make them in different shapes by constricting the gourd as it's growing. So it can have a waist, or it can be fat at one end and thin at the other, like dinosaurs and so on. And some of the designs are done by etching, like that one, and others are done by pyro engraving. They get a little piece of coconut husk that's burning, and then they burn a bit of the design, put it in the fire again, and burn a little bit more, and so on. So that's this one here, for example. These are phallocrypts, not lime containers, but I put them there to show that this group here, this is Waina, the northern part of the border mountains, and they etch designs on the lime gourds and on their phallocrypts. Here, Uri, who are towards the southern end of the border mountains, etch their lime gourds, but pyro engrave the phallocrypts. And these are the ones that are copied by the people on the river here, with pyro engraved. That previously, in 1914, used to have the long, undecorated ones. Over here is from Yellow River area, where the designs are rather more figurative. They represent insects or other, like lizards sometimes. And sometimes they use a lizard skin to cover the lime container. And in this area here, you see that this type of phallocrypt also has this kind, which comes from the east. So they've adopted their neighbour's form in that particular area. So you can see there's overlaps of kinds of objects and how they decorate them. When I was collecting these things, I often asked them what the designs represented, and they gave me these kind of stories. This is a duck here, the head, body feathers, the wings, tail, so on. So although when you look at it at first it might not look like something, when they point out what it is, it begins to look like something. I was also interested in their buildings. So in the northern part of the border mountains, the buildings are on the ground with a roof that slopes towards the back. About the middle of the border mountains, the houses are well off the ground. Underneath there is a space for women who are menstruating or giving birth to a child. But that's the normal family space up top. which they reach by a notched ladder that you can see lying here horizontally. Further south again, they're not actually on the ground quite, but very low to the ground. And they have this peculiar projection through the roof, which characterises that particular group's kind of house. And then when you get down on the Sepik River, they build these big multi-family community houses, well off the ground, partly as a vantage point traditionally when they were attacked by an enemy, they could shoot down, but also because of flooding. They also say that it's a little better up there with mosquitoes because it catches the breeze. Not so many mosquitoes. Now, the second part of that 1969 trip, after I'd done all that walking up north of Green River, I got a double canoe together with an outboard motor and a couple of colleagues who were doing work in the Telefomin area, and we started at Green River and we went down the Sepik, past Yellow River, up the May River to Buramai, and then down the Sepik further to Ambunti. The Yellow River houses are an A-frame. There's no side walls. The roof comes right down to the floor, and that's a men's house. So, maybe 30 men might sleep in that. And the family houses for the women and children are the same kind of house, but much smaller. Same A-frame structure. When you get to May River, they have these curved apse at either end of a gable-roofed house with many entrances, and they're also multi-family houses. Traditionally, they used to have a men's house with a conical roof, which is quite unusual in the Sepik, but the people on the May River, the Iwam, and also on the Sepik River had this conical roof men's house, and inside they had these bark, well, they're not bark really, sago petiole paintings. It's the base of the sago frond, palm frond, and they flatten it out, and it makes a piece of material about that wide at the top and about that wide at the bottom, about 5 feet long, and they use that to paint on. Now, an interesting thing is that in the border mountains, for protection, they used a cuirass, a woven rattan cuirass. Then on the river, they don't have these at all. They have shields. And then when you go up into the mountains, on Telefomin, they're back onto these cuirasses, woven cane cuirasses. Now, some people think that, well, they have them right to the north coast at Wanimo and Aitupi, they have these. And some people think that they're copies of Portuguese armour, because some of them have little like woven string bits under the arm to provide flexibility, and that's exactly what the Portuguese armour had too, little leather bits with the metal at the front and back. So there's some thought that the early Portuguese explorers may have been seen with these things and they copied them. And that went south through the border, across the Bryony Range, south to the border mountains, and then up to central New Guinea. Now that is interesting because with the shields on the river itself, near Green River, that suggests that those people came up the river after that transmission of that kind of artefact, the cuirass. And if they were introduced by the Portuguese in, say, the 16th, 17th century or whatever, 16th probably, then that gives you some idea that these people would have moved up the Sepik River into the Green River area sometime after that and cut off one lot from the other lot who were using the cane armour. When I went there in 72-3, I spent a month at Telefomin and then went down to the Green River area and went up to the Ilam Valley. It's about a day by motor canoe and walking from Green River itself. And then east of that there's another valley called the Samaya Valley, and that's just a photograph up the valley. And I went there for a few days and recorded some songs and some stories and collected some artifacts. That's here. So that photograph you just saw was looking from here that way into the mountains. And that's where I was based at a village called Bamblediam for about 11 months. But we did take a bit of time off and went with our double canoe and a smaller runabout canoe at the back. Reprising my 1969 trip down the Sepik, up the May River again, continuing down the Sepik and up the April River to Gahom, back down and to Ambunti, and also a little side journey into the Quima people at Tongwinjam and Bangwis in the hills behind Ambunti. That extended my sort of knowledge and experience of some of these people in the Upper Sepik. Now this is the kind of community house they had both on the river amongst the Abau, but also amongst the Amto in that Samaya Valley. And when I was there I saw a decrepit house that had collapsed, but this was my reconstruction of it. It was like this, had a dance floor in the centre there. It had a centre pole, but the centre pole was not attached to the floor. It just went through the floor, but it wasn't tied to it. So when the men were dancing here, observed by the women and children around here, they'd do this slow bending thing, and the whole floor would start working like a trampoline, like this. Now that style of house is found in the Upper May River amongst the Myanmar. The Abau of the Idam Valley said they had it, and I've found a reference to the same kind of house built in the same sort of way with a trampoline floor in Borneo. And I've since been informed that there are other places in eastern Indonesia where they're found. So what that suggests is that this was an introduction, perhaps by Malay bird of paradise plume gatherers. They would come in and set up a base camp somewhere and then go out into the forest and either collect the birds of paradise or have the locals do it for them. Now I don't even dispute the possibility that there might have been some interaction, physical, sexual interaction between these Malays and the local people, because at that place, Bamblediam, where I was based for 11 months, the head man and his son both had quite high, unusually high cheekbones, and their eyes were just that little bit slightly Asian looking. And I thought, I think something must have happened here in the past. and this kind of artifact, finding this kind of architecture there, suggests that kind of interaction between people from Malay bird hunters and the people of New Guinea. Not only that, at Amanab, they dug up a stone object, which is quite an unusual piece, which is nothing like a Papua New Guinea piece. It was excavated when they were digging drains at the patrol post, and it has a figure like this with some kind of kilt and arm pieces and so on, and a headdress. Absolutely nothing to do with anything you'd find in New Guinea. And another one was found almost identical near Lake Sentani on the north coast, just across the border in West Papua. And that's where they found these bronze drums and so on from the Dong Son area era in Cambodia. So all this harks back to a long trade link through, probably connected to India, coming through Southeast Asia, through Borneo and through Malaya and through West Papua and reaching as far as the north coast of New Guinea. And there are the little blue beads also that are found on artefacts in Wainimo and Itaby and places like that, and even inland amongst these people. And they come from way, way back. The glass beads, I think someone told me they're made in Venice, but I wouldn't be sure of that. But they certainly come from a long, long way away. So those are ancient trade routes, and we see some of the effect of that in the architecture here. I got people to do drawings and to fill them in with colours, felt tip colours, on big sheets of paper. And I got 365, I think it was, altogether, 344 designs I had done, some from the Abau people on the river and some from those Amto people in the West Range to the east. And the ones to the east are more figurative, as you can see, birds and so on, and a crocodile. It sort of vaguely looks like some sort of four-legged creature. But these ones here, rarely do you get any kind of figurative design on them. They're more like the shield designs. But they're very beautiful, and one could do some sort of analysis of them, I suppose, sometime, if you get time. Now, from all of those trips that I did in New Guinea and in central New Guinea in 64, 67, in the Upper Sepik 68, 69, 72, 3, collecting for the various museums. I think I must have collected about 4,500 pieces altogether, and they got distributed. And I thought it'd be great to be able to pull all that together as a virtual single collection. And then you'd have a vast database. You'd have shields from all over. You'd have different kinds of ornaments and different kinds of stone tools and so on, from all over that whole region of the Upper Sepik there and central New Guinea. And then you can really do some interesting analysis. So I got 2 Australian Research Council grants, 2004 and 2007. So 6 years of grants. We had a PhD student, and what he did was, and I helped him here in Australia, but he went overseas. He went to America, he went to Europe, he went to the UK, he went to PNG, he went to the US, and he photographed every object he could find from that region and recorded the information. Now, a lot of it I had myself. For the stuff I collected, I had all the notes, so that was all right. But we also included collections made by other anthropologists who'd sat down for a year here, there, or 2 years there, and made collections and got much deeper information, really. And their collections were in various museums. So we finished up with 10,000 photographs, or photographs of 10,000 objects that were all over the world, but from that region. And so then I thought, well, must make a website of this. So my son, who was 15 years old at the time and attending international high school and crazy about computers, I said, can we make a website about this stuff? And he said, yeah, sure. So he created a website. It was just a basic website at first, telling what we were doing, the collections we were making, reports of the different trips, collecting all this information, and a couple of papers that were written. And then I said, well, can we do something with a Google Earth satellite image, a terrain image like that, and have pinpointed where each object comes from, so that you can click on those, see all those little green dots, they're village locations, and they're determined on a map by long lat coordinates. And you feed that into the computer, puts a dot on the Google Earth image, and if you click on that point, you'll see all the objects that come from that particular village. And you can, as you can see over here, you can search by a language group, which are those polygons there in different colours, or you can search by the village, which are the green dots, and it will list all the objects, and you can arrange the objects in alphabetical order. So if you want to look at all the shields, you just go down to S, find the shields, look at all the shields from there. You can do the whole collection if you want, regardless of where they come from, and look at all the shields in the whole lot. Now at the moment, we've only got 2,480 objects on that site, but there's another 7,500 I've got to process and get put on the site. So then we'll have, close to 10,000 objects, and you can just scan through that. People in New Guinea who want to know the artifacts from their village or from their people, the language group of their people, they can find this on their mobile phone. You can find it on the mobile phone. You can work this website on your mobile phone. All you do is look up www.uscngp.com/dataset/ and it'll go straight to that particular protocol for looking at the objects. Now some of the things that I collected in 1972-3, that was for the Commonwealth Art Advisory Board, and we were collecting, there was a couple of other collectors too working in New Guinea, and we were collecting for the National Gallery of Art in Canberra. Now, when Whitlam came in, he decided to accelerate independence in New Guinea, and as part of that process, he decided that these collections that myself and a couple of other people had made in New Guinea would go straight to the Port Moresby Museum, not to Canberra. And that was his way of, I suppose, suggesting some kind of repatriation. Well, they hadn't even come to Australia. They hadn't left New Guinea. And they were sent straight to the Port Moresby Museum. And the irony was that I collected twice the amount I needed to collect, thinking that one half would go to Moresby and one half would go to Canberra. But in the end, all of it went to Moresby. So all those collections are now in Moresby. So some of the things I collected in 72 and 73, those are ones from central New Guinea, are now in the Masterpieces exhibition at the National Museum in Waigani, Papua New Guinea. And down near Ambunti, I collected these objects, Minja and Nokwi, which are also in the Masterpieces exhibition. This one I think some of the cubists would have enjoyed. Mostly Nokwi are very rounded forms, but this one is very cubist. That's the National Museum there. That's the main part of the museum. This bit here is the bookshop and so on, and that's that building there. When I got there in October 1980, I was eating my lunch one day, and some of my staff came rushing in, the collection managers came rushing in and said, "The roof's leaking, the rain's pouring in." I said, "Oh, bullshit. It can't be, it's a new building." No, come. They dragged me away from the desk and my lunch, and it was like a shower in there through the main exhibition area. It was just pouring through the roof. And it turned out what had happened, there'd been an earthquake a few months before, and all these, where's my pointer? All these here are concrete tiles about 2 meters long and about half a meter wide, with little notches in them so that they sit into one another, and they're all lying on plastic, big sheets of plastic, very heavy duty plastic, that is lying on wire cables. So when the earthquake came, it shook the cables and these things slid down and tore the plastic and the rain came through. So we had like hours to get all the stuff out of the exhibition area with all this rain pouring through. So we cleared the space in about 4 hours, except for the really big objects which we couldn't move, like house posts and things like that. And we just got ladders and scaffold and put huge pieces of plastic over it. And then inside the exhibition area, I got rolls and rolls of plastic, clear plastic, taped them together and got up on a scaffold about 7 metres high, hooked it up to the highest part of the exhibition area, which had a sloping roof, down to the central area of the museum, which has a little zoo in there, but it was outside, so it collected all the water and ran it outside the building, outside the exhibition area, to try and save all the carpets and everything else. And the director's going, "Oh, we'll never save them, we'll never save them." I said, "Bullshit, we'll save them." And we did. We saved all of that. We got fans going for about 3 months, just running, drying the whole place out. And then we had to redo the exhibition. The exhibition was terrible. It's been done by a window dresser from London or something. Awful. With flashing disco lights and the security blokes used to put Slim Dusty on the sound system, and all the lights are flashing to Slim Dusty over this Masterpieces exhibition. It was ridiculous. So I got rid of all that. And there were, I think, 120 objects on display at the time, and I put more, and so it became 210 objects. And I regrouped them so that they made a bit more sense. So objects of one kind together, of another kind together, and so on and so on. So I redid the exhibition, and we got it reopened in September the following year, 81. We were pulling down scaffold as Michael Samari came in to open the exhibition. Now, when I became curator in 1980, one of the first jobs I had was to go to the Octetti area that would be impacted by Octetti mining and do a cultural survey, heritage survey, to see what should be protected by law. So that was like a month walking through that area, taking photographs of some of the sacred buildings. Now this one shows the same building, 1967 when I walked through there, 1972 when I walked through there, and in 1983 when I walked through, because I did the trip again in 1983. So that building was maintained. You can see it's falling in bits there, but they refurbished it, got it up again, and there it's still okay. And this is the one at a village called Bultem. That's in 1967. In 1981 it's falling apart, and in 1983 they completely redid it with new boards, which don't look much like the older ones, but they did have a go at it. They at least refurbished it. At Telefomin itself, there's a sacred temple that all the tribal groups send representatives to at the highest stage of initiation. And it's a bit like the Black Stone at Mecca, you know, for these people. And they come from all around to the highest stage of initiation, which takes place here. And that was a photograph I took in '64. That's a photograph I took again in 1972, in 1983. You can see it's been kept really well, because at that stage of initiation, each initiate is given some leaf to put on the roof, to re-roof the house. Each one takes some roofing material and goes up there and puts it in. So they kept that house beautifully, because it's very important to them. But in 2002, when I dropped by, some Christian fundamentalists had burnt down the house, even though it had been gazetted as National Cultural Property. So it was protected by law, but that was ignored. And they burnt down the house. Some of the sacred relics had rolled into the grass. I took a photograph there. And these houses here at the back were adjunct houses, not the cult house, because it's gone completely. You can see it completely gone. Whereas here, these are for lower stages of initiation. They'd been neglected and left to fall apart. So, gone. And the museum did nothing about it. I mean, the National Museum should have been in there finding out who did that and prosecuting them. They were missionaries, you know, they had no right to do that kind of thing. And they were European missionaries who were pushing this stuff, Australian missionaries. Makes me mad. And this was what was inside that house. An array of 6,000 lower jaw bones of pigs, other jaw bones of pigs in the bottom there, sacred relics in the string bags in the middle there, where the red dot is, here, skulls and so on of the original ancestress, they claimed. And the shield, now I don't know whether they'd sold the shield out before all this happened or not, or whether that was burnt as well, but I mean, 6,000 jaw bones. Imagine how many years of pig kill, because they're not like the Anga, who kill hundreds of pigs in one go. These people maybe kill half a dozen, and then several months later maybe another half dozen, because they don't have that many pigs. So 6,000 of them, that represented the accumulation of pig jaw bones from about 1887, from around about then. Because that's when that house had been previously destroyed by an enemy group coming from the north, attacking and burning down that house. And I've been able to pinpoint it at about 1887 from the age of some old people who I interviewed in the early 60s, and their genealogies and so on. So over a period of about 100 years, 6,000 jaw bones. Sepik. That's what you'll see on the Sepik sometimes. Magnificent cloud formations. So while I was curator, I did 3 trips on the Sepik, and I've just combined them all there. So that on some trips I did some tributaries, and other trips I did others. But on the whole, I went from, where's our little dot? There it is. Mbunti, sometimes starting from Pagui, coming in from Wewak through Yanguru and Marprik and photographing and buying objects for the National Museum in Port Moresby. Then down the Sepik to as far as Morit Lakes, Kopar, which is almost at the mouth of the Sepik, and to Watam Lakes on the east side. Going up the Karam River, Kambot, Bobton, Gorogopa, up the Uat River as far as the Sangamut, that's getting pretty far up. Up the Karawari and the tributary of the Waggat Mary, Shambi Lakes, and also inland to the Sawas-speaking people. So that's the whole area, sometimes multiple times, especially going down the Sepik, covered on each trip. And collecting for the museum, buying stuff for the National Museum, and so on. And there's a paper on that Upper Sepik Central New Guinea website called Slit Gongs of the Sepik and Madang districts. So what I found on the Sepik was there are at least 4 kinds of slit gongs, garamits. There's the long-nosed type. Towards the back there's a short slit. Most of it's taken up with a carved prow, I call them. On the Sepik itself, a Yatmal, and a bit further down you get a crocodile often, or other animal, sometimes a fantastical animal. That's a combination of wild pig and crocodile and so on. Often with another image here, which could be a person or an animal, which is a totem animal. And most of the drum is a slit here. And then there's what I call the big mouse, because it's like a carp fish, and that's for the Sawas inland to the north. And then as you get down to the lower Sepik, Morit Lakes and so on, you get these symmetrical ones that are the same prow and stern, look exactly the same, and the design itself is bilaterally symmetrical. So they get those 4 kinds of slit gong, roughly speaking. There's a few variations, but... And then I found that you get different images of a variation of the same legend or myth. So there was the legend of a woman who's marooned on a grass island, floating down the Sepik or in a lake like Lake Chambry. And she's marooned there, and a crocodile comes up and seduces her. and takes her down into his underwater village. And she gives birth there to 2 eggs. And the eggs she puts in pots. And they hatch and they become eagles. And they sit on the edge of the pots making eagle noises. And then they fly off. And they do all sorts of things. Now, further down the Sepik, at this village called Curator, the story is somewhat different. The woman is seduced by the crocodile. She gives birth to a snake and an eel. And that's them here, emerging from her vagina. But at the same time, simultaneously, the tail of the crocodile comes around into the vagina. So what it's doing is portraying simultaneously sexual intercourse and birth. And that's the interesting thing about a lot of Sepik carvings and so on, that simultaneity of action that normally would be separated in time. And it would be an interesting thing to look at how that happens in legends, stories, in songs, and in other carvings. Up here is the part where one of the eagle's sons carries the mother, who gave birth to the 2 eggs, up into a platform up in a tree. And the story goes on and on and on. It's quite long, which I won't try and recount here. But that's that particular part of the episode of that story. Whereas here it's the simultaneous impregnation and birth. You can move even within one village and ask different people for stories, and you'll get variations on the same story. And if you move to another village, you'll get a more significant variation, and so it goes. During these trips, one time I was fortunate to be able to get some guys demonstrate the long flutes they play. Again, each flute may have 2 notes, woo, 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 but there are different tones. Each flute has a different tone. So they have to play together to get the melody going and keep in rhythm. It's quite complicated. And these are the carvings at the end of the flutes here, and these represent kind of parrot. And these are totems. Each clan will have a number of totems. They don't just have one, they have several. And sometimes they're animals, sometimes birds, sometimes insects, sometimes a mountain or a particular part of a river. It can be anything, animate or inanimate. And I ran into this chap, Michael Meyer, at Murick Lakes at Corral, and he was a kind of local ethnomusicologist. He used to go around to all the villages locally and learn their songs and memorise them. So I recorded a number of the songs that he'd memorised from his own village but other villages, and he wanted to keep the heritage of the songs alive. That was his intention. Incredible purpose. Sometimes you find hybrid traditional objects that are hybrid modern. So here's a carving in the Yatmal style, or Sawa style actually, and it's a policeman with his blue serge uniform and his cap, soft cap, and his bayonet at the back. And then over here at the Catholic mission, they had a crucifixion at the prow of the drum, which you can see is that big mouse type image at the front with the crucifixion along the top. I found a post at Tumbanum, village of one of the houses at Tumbanum, which Jim's familiar with, and it was a mermaid, a woman's body with a fish tail all painted green, and they must have seen the image in a magazine or somewhere, and they reproduced it on the house post. This is a typical men's house, cult house of the Sawas, and they're lower to the ground than they are on the river because there's less chance of flooding. And these are some details of the up here and up there. That's the masks they put up there. The central mask is the spirit of the house, which is female. And this is a debating stool inside that house. And you can see the same kind of paints being used there. They're enamel paints, which last better than the ochres. Karawari, out in the upper Karawari, you're getting close to the Central Range. It's a beautiful area. And these are some of the objects I've photographed there. All these have personal names. Moran Gunma, which was for sickness curing. Then this one is for cassowary hunting. It has a cassowary bone here, so it helps men who are going cassowary hunting. And this one is for hunting and warfare, Ginguma. And here in the Wagapmeri, they were doing those Arepa and Yipwan carvings for sale. I bought a few for myself and also a few for the museum. And they were beautifully done. And they, of course, left them out in the weather to make them look a bit older. But they were carved in the 70s. And I came along there in 82 and they were selling them. They were a bit annoyed because there weren't many people coming up to buy their carvings. So I bought quite a few from them, make them a bit happier. But they're beautifully carved. And then in Cambot, as you know, Helen Dennett has spent a lot of time with Simon Novep and published a little book on Simon Novep's paintings. And here were 4 that Simon had done, which I bought for the National Museum. And this one, there are 2 legendary brothers, Mobile and Woyan. And this one is Woyan here, and that's Mobile there. And these are 2 other legendary characters, one who turns into a crocodile. So in the image you can see it's half human, half crocodile. But in the story, he's human and then turns into a crocodile and things happen. And over here, the human turns into a parrot and things happen. The story goes on. So they show them as a human with parrot head, as a human, half crocodile. That's the way they represent this transformation, the shape-shifting, as I like to call it. The people of the Sepik absolutely convinced about shape-shifting. You walk into the forest somewhere by yourself hunting, and you might come across a wild boar, and you're not sure whether that's really a pig or whether it's some spirit that's taken the form of a boar and is going to give you a bad time. So all these things can happen. They can turn into a tree or a big stone. So all the time they're sort of watching to see what kind of shape-shifting might have occurred around them and that they've got to be aware of and take cautionary measures against. Now, down at Mooick and nearby, and Jim knows about this, you get similar masks. These are called brag, and they're believed to contain a spirit. Now, the brag spirit is not quite just an ancestor. It's kind of an ancestral spirit, but it's a different kind of genus of spirit. It's not a human spirit. And they're quite dangerous. They have carvings often here, like that. I'm not quite sure if that's a lizard or not, but I think it's a lizard. That's a lizard for sure. There's something there which I think is probably a lizard. That might be tiny little lizards, I'm not sure. But these are the vehicles of the spirit. So when the spirit wants to go out and do things from its habitation in the mask, it goes in the form of that animal, and it's called a canoe. It's the spirit's canoe. In other words, the means by which it gets from one place to another. So you can do an incantation and ask the spirit to attack an enemy. And so it takes the form of the animal, its canoe, and goes out, and spiritually it weakens the enemy. So when you come along to attack them, you win. Now all these masks have the same name, Sendam. And you can see there's slight variations in the carvings, like these eyes here are more slanted than those. This is a wider mask than, say, that one. This is a much longer mask, and so on. Now, this one I photographed at the village called Darapup, but it was carved at Watam and traded to Darapup. This one I photographed at Yangamut and was carved there fairly recently. This one I photographed at Aramut and that's where it was carved. This one was photographed at Corral, but it was, again, carved at Watam and traded in. This one was carved at Marbuk, and that's where I photographed it. This one was carved at photographed at Mendam, but was carved at Watam. So you can begin to see that Watam is a village that specialises in carving these masks and often trades them. It's not exclusive, but it does a lot of them. So when you go and look at these sort of things in the field, you have to not ask, just don't assume that where you photographed them or saw them, that that's where they were carved. You have to ask, who carved this? Where did it come from? Because it may have come from quite some distance away. Sometimes a mask is causing havoc where it was carved and owned, and the people want to get rid of it. It's causing too much trouble. So they'll trade it off to some other village and say, it's too dangerous for us. You look after it now. And we'll give you a magic spear to help. That kind of thing. I got stories like that. So behind all these masks are quite elaborate stories of ownership, of troubles caused, of ways of using them for various sorcery or treachery or for warfare or for whatever. I went to New Ireland. These objects here had been brought into the museum just before I arrived as curator, because they were in a little local museum, if you like, but the kids were getting in there and damaging them. So it was decided that they should come to the National Museum. So they brought them in. And then there was a German anthropologist who was working in this village where they were located. So I communicated with her and said, look, we'd like more information about these. So I brought photographs of the objects to her. And I said, see what you can find out about these pieces, because there was no documentation. And she found out a lot, and it got published in a journal called Oral History, the information about these objects. So that was one purpose of going. The other was that Michael Gunn, who some of you probably know, who was at the time curator at the museum in Darwin, had gone to Tabar, which is just off the coast of New Ireland, to do some research for a PhD. And he'd collected recent carving. They were recently carved pieces. And the provincial government had impounded them, saying they were cultural heritage and all this stuff. But he'd already cleared it with the National Museum. He was going to give half the collection to the National Museum. So I had to break loose his collection from the provincial authorities, which was quite an adventure. I won't bother you with it now, but that was the other purpose for going on that trip, was to get that collection safely to Port Moresby so that he could take his component to Darwin, which is where it is now, and the other part is in the National Museum in Port Moresby, well, Waigani. So that's where that trip was from, where is our dot? Down here, out to Panameko, where those carvings, old carvings came from, where the anthropologist was located. Did a trip down to there just to see what the place was like. And myself and the anthropologist had heard, or she had heard, that there was going to be a big ceremony here at Langania. So I went with her there, and we sort of watched what was going on there, and which went on till wee small hours. I just conked out. I couldn't handle it. I had to go to sleep while the stuff was still happening. And then when that was over, I went to Konos here, and that's the takeoff point for motorboats to go across to Tabar here. And Mike Gunn's collection was here at Mapua, and so I had to go up there and get all that loaded onto a boat and brought to Kavieng, and then on a plane to Port Moresby. And this is one of the Tantanua masked dances that was happening at the time at Langania. And they always dance in pairs. Sometimes there might be 2 pairs, 4 pairs, 6 pairs, there can be a lot, but they're always in pairs, dancing opposite one another. And there was a woman here who was taking the mickey out of them. She pulled a basket, a roughly woven basket that they use for carrying around, betel nut or whatever, pulled that over her legs, poked a couple of holes in the corners and pulled it over her legs to replicate the green skirts. And she got a shopping bag, multicoloured plastic shopping bag, and pulled it over her head, which represented the Tantanua mask. And you can see this young kid here is laughing because he could see that she was punning on what these guys were doing. And this is Tabar Islands. It's a lifted limestone terrain which gets undercut by the sea. And I photographed 2 slit drums from Tabar. We're more familiar with the ones from the Sepik, but they do them in New Ireland and Tabar as well. They look different, of course. And then I went across to the Sulka people at the village of Guma. Now, one of the collection managers at the National Museum grew up in Guma. He's a Guma man and spoke Sulka, of course. And so he came, and the conservator came, an English girl, Rowena Hill, and we came from Rabaul on a copra boat, this sort of little boat here, along the east coast here across the bay to arrive at Guma. And the celebration was for a young man who was being introduced into the priesthood, Catholic priesthood. His ordination, his name is Joe Quinty, the Franciscan priesthood. And so they were doing all these traditional dances as a celebration of that. So this was the Kulakun masks being danced, and the women here dancing with the men wearing the masks. And over here there are dances and processions with these long painted wands, beautiful things. And the museum was lucky to get some donated, and some, we purchased some as well, masks. And then there was this spectacular mask, which was called Bethlehem. Now, of course, this is an ordination into the Roman Catholic priesthood. So the Christian theme was Bethlehem, the birth of Jesus Christ. So this is, I'm not sure if this, I think this is Mary here. And on the opposite side is Joseph. And on each side the angels. And in the centre is a manger with the Christ child in it. And that is all built underneath this large umbrella thing, is about 2 meters diameter. And they dance that. Amazing thing. And we bought it for the National Museum. Now normally this kind of mask, when it's danced, it takes months to build it. And then they dance it for 15, 20 minutes, and they take it off into the bush and destroy it. And it's not supposed, the women are supposed to think it's being danced by spirits. They all know, of course. They told me they know. But anyway, you're not supposed to know that you know. And so to get it out, I had to wait for night time, get it onto the boat at night, row it out in a little rowboat out to the copra boat, pull down all the blinds, and then the next morning passengers come on, and it's hidden from them. We get to Rabaul, wait for all the passengers to disembark, and then sneak it into a warehouse and build a box for it. So I did that. I built a box for a big plywood box, about 2 meters on each side. Got the thing in there because I'd contacted the Air New Guinea and said, what size can I get into your cargo hold? They told me. I said, I can fit this in. Get to the plane, I can't fit it in. So I had to pull the box apart, put the mask in, put all the bits of the box in the plane to get it in there, fly it to Moresby, get it out again, put it in the box, rebuild the box, put it in, truck it to the museum. What a to-do, you know. Well, that's the sort of thing that happens in New Guinea, you know. You have to sort of, you know, be light on your feet, solving problems. I don't have time to go on any longer. It's already well over now. People are probably nodding off now. So I'm going to have to stop at 1983 when I was at the Papua New Guinea Museum. And since then I did field work for the South Australian Museum 92, 93, around Christmas time, New Year, in New Ireland and Sulka again, buying stuff for the museum and getting organised some people to come down from New Guinea to perform at the Pacific Arts Festival or Symposium at the museum in Adelaide, which they did. We got the masks down and then they performed them for all these professional anthropologists and others, museum people, and the public. And some of that material is now in the Pacific Gallery. So that was 92, 93. In 97, I went to Vanuatu to organise for 2 Vanuatuans to come to Adelaide to coincide with the Adelaide Festival of Arts in 1998. And we'd been given one of those big slit drums from Ambron, the ones with the big carved head on the top and the slit below it, and they were standing drums. They don't lie down. And an Adelaide person had donated to the museum, but she wasn't really sure where it had come from. So I went to the Vanuatu with a photograph of it and tracked down what village it was from and who'd carved it. And then got 2 guys to come from that location to come to Vanuatu, to come to Adelaide and to repaint the face of the drum as part of that whole festival performance. And I made collections that replicated some of the material collected in, or the museum bought in 1895 from a Presbyterian missionary. So flutes and some other objects, baskets, woven baskets and other things. I got the modern examples from 97 to match the 1895 collection that he'd made a bit earlier than that. So that got set up as an exhibition. It's still on in the Pacific Gallery. So that was fun, doing all that. But also what I did was I took to the Vanuatu Cultural Centre photographs of the entire Vanuatuan collection in the South Australian Museum, so they knew what we had. They could see what we had. And one of the interesting things there was that canoe prows from northeast Malakula, there's some little islands off the northeast there, these canoe prows with a bird on the front. Now, if you look at the literature from Layard in the 20s, and Christian Kaufman even repeats this in that book, Arts of Vanuatu, this bird is a frigate bird. But I had a photograph of a mask in the South Australian Museum with a bird on the top, a white bird with a forked tail and a black stripe here. I asked Ralph Regan-Vanu, who's now I think a minister in the government there, but was director of the Cultural Centre, his father told me that bird's name, because I asked, what bird is this? He said, we call it Salip. We don't know what you call it, but it's Salip. Oh, okay. So I went to these little islands and there's the canoe prow. I said, what bird is that on the canoe prow? And they said, Salip. Wow, that's interesting, because frigate birds aren't white. They're quite dark, they're almost black, grey, black colour. They have a forked tail, but they're not white. And they don't have a black thing down the head there. So when I came back to the museum, I looked up the bird books, and it's a roseate tern. A roseate tern is what that bird is. But all the literature says it's a frigate bird. So in 1997, you could find out something original, which blew my mind. You know, just asking questions, having the right image to provoke the answer, which was a mask with that bird represented on top. And then later in 2002, I went to New Ireland again, did some things, came to the Torricelli Mountains on north of Lumi area, and I was interested in these objects in the museum. I'd never seen anything like them. What the hell are these, you know? We have 3 of them. And they were collected in about 1929, I think it was, by a patrol officer. And then I got a tip from Jim Specht, who was the archaeologist here for many years and retired. He'd heard about a film being made in this area by a biologist from the Australian Museum. And so I had a look at that film and saw, and his diaries and photographs, which were in the Fisher Library at the time, and saw this image. And here are these objects. And there's a black and white film. The original's now down in Canberra, but Fisher Library still has a copy. So I got digitised bits of that film and took it back there and tried to find out more about these things, what they were and what they were doing. And some other objects like this one, which we've got in the South, which is in the South Australian Museum. I won't say we because I'm not there anymore. And there were objects like that in the film. So I was going around with a laptop with these sequences from the movie on the laptop, and sometimes I'd have 100 people in a native materials church, all packed in there, looking at this little laptop image. And then the ones at the front would go to the back, and the ones at the back come to the front and have a look, you know. So I was able to find out some things, but they were so Christianised, a lot of them would say, oh, no, we don't know anything about that. That looks too rude, you know. So they would deny anything about it. But our neighbours, they know about that. Those people over there, they know about that, you know. So you had that kind of embarrassment about something like that looks phallic. I never did really find out exactly what that was all about. It was a clowning thing, and in the dances they made, that guy would go around and bump into people with it, as like a clown. But I wondered, I talked to Tim Flannery when he was director just before I left on that trip. And I said, do you think it could possibly be representations of some kind of mammal penises? Because certain mammals have hooks and barbs on them, on their penis, so when they attempt to have intercourse with the female of the species, they're hooked in there until the whole process has had its time, and then they unhook. So I wondered about that, and he said, well, it's possible, but I couldn't get any confirmation of that from the people. But it might be they've forgotten or didn't know that. And it could be that something like that was going on. I don't know. It was a wild guess, but I didn't get any confirmation. So that was it. That'll be it for tonight. Thank you for being patient.